Right lads, picture this. You're in the venue, all giddy because you're about to watch Turnstile play a bunch of songs from their new album Glow On. Before that though, there's a few support acts to play that you've not heard of before, and out comes a band. Never ending game. A heavy guitar riff starts playing and a massive pit opens up in the crowd. Limbs are coming at you from all angles and you're there fucking dodging, ducking, dipping, diving and dodging. The vocalist cries out for the crowd to kick someone in the dick and you are frozen in horror, contemplating everything that has happened in your life to lead you up to this point. Welcome to the world of beatdown. But where had this new style of hardcore come from? Well kids, gather around because it's time to tell you a story. A story on beatdown's rise and fall and rise again. This is how beatdown hardcore reclaimed its former glory. So what is it? Beatdown hardcore, also known as heavy hardcore or simply beatdown, is a subgenre of hardcore punk which makes use of elements from various different genres like thrash metal, slam death metal, and hip hop. Over time, as the genre developed, the definition has expanded to involve more artists within the metal genre. It incorporates low shouty vocals to the sound of down-tuned guitars and thrash metal-inspired drums, with a distinct emphasis on breakdowns. As the sound grew, bands would start to make use of palm-muted guitar riffs, inspired by slam music. I don't play guitar, so I've got no idea what that means, but play me some beatdown, and I'll be like, yeah, that's beatdown. Like, drop D? Sure, but I mean, at least take me out for dinner. Amongst all these different elements, bands started to integrate hip-hop influenced vocals as well as its imagery. Bands would often include logos and album art that feature graffiti and the all-around aesthetic of hip-hop artists. It's just so genre-bending. It's basically like Sleep Token, but subsequently, due to this mishmash of different genres, the lines have become increasingly blurred, especially between metalcore, deathcore, etc., etc. But I'm sure you're wondering, James, where did this scary hardcore music come from? Well, my sweet little cherub, come here. It's okay. For that, we need to go back in time, all the way back to the 1980s. So before beatdown, there was another style of hardcore called tough guy hardcore. The sound was pretty similar to what we know beatdown as today, but back then, this was all new and fresh, and more importantly, featured lyrics about hatred and personal struggles and unity. We already had bands like Cro-Mags and Agnostic Front start to develop this sort of tough guy ethos. But it wasn't until the late 80s until we started to see the first wave of tough guy hardcore bands. Bands like Breakdown, Judge and Killing Time came about, pushing this tough guy mentality to new heights. Like, this music would consist of heavy guitar riffs, heavy breakdowns, and a whole bunch of gang vocals for fans to sing along to. Everything about this style of music was so unifying for people. It was also starting to get heavily criticized for its perceived hyper-masculinity, with people claiming that encouraged herd mentality and physical violence, which, if you've watched my video on crowd killing, then you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So as this whole tough guy thing was going on, and with the whole thing about unity, we started to see a development in something known as hardcore crews. In fact, I think one defining aspect to hardcore is its close association to hardcore crews, like New York's DMS and London's LBU. Crews were so prevalent to scenes across the globe that academic Jeff Perkler coined the term crew scene hardcore. Another academic, Edgar Peralta, defined these crews as being people involved in the hardcore scene who unify based on reciprocal ties and varying interests, including non-criminal elements such as music or sports, but also including some criminal elements, which often include violence and graffiti, specifically originating as a means to oppose the alt-right currents in their scenes. He also mentions in the paper that hardcore crews specifically have a unique history in the hardcore music scene. Obviously. Previous research on hardcore crews suggests that crews as we know them today developed out of a combination of three forces: skinhead culture, hardcore music, and the straight edge movement. Beatdown's origins are particularly tied to New York's DMS, the Doc Martin Skinheads. Founded in the 1980s by Jared DMS, a New York street artist, the crew embraces elements of hardcore, hip-hop, graffiti, motorcycle, skinhead, and skateboarding culture. The crew has members of all ethnicities, including members that formed bands like Madball, Scarhead, and most importantly, Bulldoze. Now, it's impossible to talk about beatdown without talking about Bulldoze. In 1996, Bulldoze released the iconic album The Final Beatdown, giving the genre its name, and laying down the blueprint to what made the genre so unique. Bulldoze, along with Kev One's other band, Terrorzone, merged the sound of New York hardcore with heavy breakdowns and lyrics talking about personal struggles and crew activity. These two bands are considered the founding fathers of beatdown. They pioneered the genre and you have to give them their flowers. As the genre grew, bands like Fury of Five and E-Town Concrete came in to really solidify the genre as a mainstay in hardcore. Around the same time, something similar was happening over in the UK, where we started to see a rise not just to beatdown, but hardcore in general. London Black Up was formed in 1996 by friends in the bands Knuckle Dust and Nine Bar, and are pivotal to the London hardcore scene and UK hardcore as a whole. A whole bunch of bands are able to get their music out there thanks to the crew's record label, Ruction Records. If you've listened to a UK hardcore band, chances are it's a Ruction release. And thanks to the cultural diversity of London, a lot of bands have started to incorporate a mix of sounds in their music, like grime and hip hop, already challenging the definition of beatdown. With bands like Bun Them Out and 50 Caliber, the UK scene was starting to become a force to be reckoned with. But as this was all going down, cracks were beginning to form in hardcore. New sounds were emerging, challenging beatdown's dominance and reshaping the scene. So whilst these clubs are full of kids punching each other in the face and screaming, "Ah, fuck the law," or whatever, a shift was happening. Some bands began to lean into a more metal-influenced sound, which quickly started to overshadow beatdown's raw energy. However, by the late 90s, the hardcore scene found itself splintering, with beatdown taking a back seat to newer, more commercial sounds. Sounds like nu metal. Nu metal exploded in popularity in the late 90s and early 2000s. The sound existed way back in the early 90s, but it wasn't until Korn and Limp Bizkit came along that the genre really started making moves. The music was more commercial and easily digestible for the average normie, helping with its success. The radio play, MTV visibility, and polished production of nu metal all helped in the success of the genre. Now, I'm not saying that the reason for the decline in beatdown's popularity was solely due to the existence of nu metal. Hardcore and nu metal were more like cousins, and there wasn't much cross-contamination at the time between the two scenes. However, as we headed into the millennium, hardcore became ever more fractured. Metalcore, melodic hardcore, and post-hardcore all started to emerge, pulling fans in all different directions. But the ironic thing is, nu metal probably wouldn't have existed if it wasn't for beatdown. Thanks to the genre's ignorant take on riffing, this became pretty influential in nu metal's sound. And I think it's partly the reason it's so popular still to this day. There were many similarities between the two genres besides the heavy guitar riffs. Lyrics would also feature quite violent themes and also took on a lot of influence from hip-hop too, from the vocals all the way down to the aesthetics. Fred Durst. Nu metal bands will be featured heavily and high up on festivals all around the world, only fueling the beast. The stories involving beatdown didn't help either. Stories of gang violence and such run rampant throughout the scene and mainstream media, particularly from Rolling Stone, who in 2003 reported on Boston's FSU crew, mentioning the infamous documentary Boston Beatdown 2. The film features interviews of various crew members and footage of violent beatings in and around Boston clubs, ostensibly by members of FSU. And in 2009, the FBI deemed Boston's Friends Stand United a street gang. Now at this point, whilst Freddie and Johnny are tearing it up at festivals all across the globe, quite literally might I add, hardcore started to become a lot more melodic in sound. We had bands like These Nuts and Your Demise putting out fun party hardcore albums, still with themes of unity, but just less violent. And we didn't really see any development into the beatdown genre. That is until 2007, when a new demo dropped by a little band called Trapped Under Ice. Demo 2007 was imperative to bringing beatdown back to what it once was. The cover featured the band posing kind of aggressively, bringing back the whole tough guy look that was popular with beatdown back in the day. However, this new wave of beatdown came with some differences. The sound was more polished, and the music had a danceable rhythm to it, but it was also more melodic, just like the popular hardcore sound had been at the time. Then the band released Big Kiss Goodnight in 2011, and beatdown was well and truly back. Big Kiss Goodnight is regarded as one of the most influential albums in modern hardcore and set the template for all bands to come, with bands like Speed stating that TUI were a massive influence to their sound. Beatdown was back and bigger than ever, and the sound continued to evolve. Bands became ever more influenced by metal, with the music becoming heavier and beefier. Some bands leaned more into the hip-hop side too, especially in the UK. We had bands like TRC, Ironed Out and Gassed Up, leaning heavily into the grime sound that was extremely popular in the UK back in the 2010s. And back in the States, bands like Pain of Truth were recreating that old school New York hardcore sound that kickstarted the genre in the first place. Its popularity was meteoric and didn't look to be slowing down at all, until something happened that stopped the whole world.
Let's go first to breaking news out of the UK, and Prime Minister Boris Johnson has just moments ago announced the country will go into a complete lockdown. Nine's Europe correspondent Sophie Walsh is in London. Soph, just take us through these very drastic measures.
Thanks to COVID-19, everyone was stuck indoors. No one could go to shows, and everyone was either scared, angry, or thought that the vaccine contained 5G. During this time, many bands were stuck. Their livelihoods were put on hold. Tours were cancelled, releases flopped, and grassroots venues were closing down. It wasn't looking good for the music industry as a whole. But as time went on, as people were cooped inside all day, they started to get more frustrated, more emotional. New bands were started, new songs released, and thanks in part to TikTok, people were hearing them. Not just hearing them, but listening and resonating. Hardcore and beatdown soared in popularity during lockdowns because of social media. Kids became more frustrated with the world, and by the time gigs were back on and the venues were open, the pits had never been so full. Bands like Knocked Loose are selling out 5,000 capped venues. Speed are the main draw at festivals, and Kubla Khan is a dumb TikTok dance.
Monkey see, monkey do. So who the fuck made you?
Beatdown evolving the way it has is why we can have tours where Turnstile can play alongside Never Ending Game, and Malevolence can play with Pain of Truth. So many bands can stake claim that they have been influenced by beatdown sound because of the way the genre has grown, and I think that's bloody beautiful. Beatdown has evolved far beyond its origins, but its core spirit of unity, aggression, and raw energy remains the same. Whether in a sweaty club or a music festival, one thing is for certain: beatdown is here to stay, and it's louder than ever. As LBU's Pierre Mendeville said to Vice magazine, "It's what we've always done, and it's what we'll always do. It's a way of life." I've been James. Thanks for watching.